You ever get that moment where you realize you've been quietly erased from your own family's traditions? It doesn't hit all at once. It creeps in like shadows lengthening at sunset. I used to believe there was just some mix-up, a timing thing, or maybe bad luck. But this year, when the same excuse showed up in my inbox, I stopped making excuses for them. What I did next? Let's just say, nobody saw it coming. My name is Amber Collins. I'm 32 years old, and I live in San Francisco, California. I've built a life I'm proud of, running a thriving design studio, collaborating with innovative brands, and living in a city that constantly fuels my creativity. But no amount of career success could dull the sting I felt every year when that text arrived. The message was always the same, almost like a cruel tradition in itself. Sorry, honey, not enough space at the Lake Tahoe retreat this year. My heart would sink before I even finished reading it. The retreat had once been sacred. A legacy passed down from my grandparents, Eleanor and Robert Collins, who created it as a haven of connection and joy. When I was young, I felt chosen, seen. Grandpa would take me on long nature walks, calling me his little artist, pointing out colors in the trees and patterns in the clouds. He saw something in me that others didn't. Those days were magic, and the retreat felt like home. But after my grandparents passed, the retreat lost its soul. My parents, Richard and Patricia, took over and turned it into something else, a stage, a show. Each year it became bigger, flashier, more about appearances than togetherness. Invitations extended to business partners, socialites, and anyone who fit into their curated vision. And somehow, every year, I was the one left out. Despite my success, I was never part of the guest list. At first, I told myself it was an oversight. Maybe they were overwhelmed. Maybe they genuinely ran out of space. I clung to excuses, desperate to preserve the illusion that I still had a place in that world. But the illusion cracked quickly. Social media betrayed the truth. Photos of massive group dinners, bonfires with dozens of people, and even family friends I'd never met. The space was never the issue. I was. If you've ever felt like the family outcast, the forgotten one, the misfit, I know how that ache settles into your bones. It's quiet, but constant. That's why I invite you to subscribe right now. Because this isn't just a story about exclusion. It's a story about reclaiming worth, and trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. Lake Tahoe wasn't just a vacation spot. It was the heartbeat of my childhood. My grandparents bought that sprawling property when I was 6, and it became the place where my siblings and I made our most cherished memories. Morning scavenger hunts, lakeside picnics, late-night ghost stories under a sky full of stars. It was paradise. My brother Jake would lead us into the woods like we were on an expedition. My sisters Amanda and Heather helped Grandma prep huge family meals in the rustic kitchen. The twins, Blake and Brian, turned every tree into an adventure, and Lily, the youngest, clung to Grandpa's side like a second shadow. But me? I was different. Grandpa saw my love for sketching and nurtured it in a way no one else did. He'd sit beside me for hours while I drew the mountains reflected in the lake, telling me, "Your art will take you places, Amber. Don't let them convince you otherwise." He saw the future I hadn't yet imagined for myself. When I chose to attend art school instead of business school, my father's plan, my grandparents were my only supporters. My father scoffed. "Artists don't pay mortgages," he said one night at dinner. My mother echoed his disdain with a tight-lipped smile. Their disappointment was palpable, but Grandpa's quiet faith in me never wavered. His belief gave me courage. His love gave me direction. After their deaths, within months of each other, the atmosphere at Tahoe changed completely. My parents took charge, and the soul of the place faded. What was once filled with childlike wonder and authenticity became a high society showcase. Each year, it seemed less about family and more about social climbing. I watched the joy leak out of every tradition, replaced by obligation and spectacle. I tried to hold on to the essence of the place, to the memories that still lingered in every pine and ripple of water. But memories can only carry you so far when the people around you insist on forgetting who you are. I poured myself into my work. While my siblings settled into careers approved by our parents, banking, law, medicine, I was freelancing, designing, building my own reputation from scratch. No handouts, no trust funds, just talent, grit, and a burning need to prove that I mattered. By the time I graduated, I already had an impressive client list. By 30, I had founded my own design studio in San Francisco, and yet none of it seemed to count in my parents' eyes. To them, my work wasn't real. My lifestyle wasn't valid. They never attended my gallery showings, never asked about the brands I partnered with, never shared my wins the way they flaunted my siblings. I became the blank space in the family narrative, an afterthought, a mistake they didn't know how to categorize, so they ignored me altogether. It hurt more than I liked to admit. I'd smile through holidays, send thoughtful gifts, keep up with birthdays, doing all the things a good daughter does, hoping maybe, one year, things would change. But the exclusion kept coming. Like clockwork, not enough space. As if my absence was the solution to an overcrowded guest list, I started noticing the patterns. How family photos were carefully cropped. How my accomplishments never made it into dinner conversations. The way my siblings spoke about me like I was an abstract concept rather than a sister. I didn't want to admit how much it got to me, but it did, every single time. And still, I hoped. Until one Instagram post shattered whatever hope I had left. I was lying on my couch one evening in early June, mindlessly scrolling through Instagram when my thumb froze. My brother Blake had posted a picture of a printed itinerary titled Collins Family Retreat Summer Edition. The caption read, "Getting excited for the biggest family gathering yet." I zoomed in on the image. What I saw made my stomach twist. 118 confirmed guests. 118. I scanned the blurry list of names. Every sibling, every cousin, every in-law, even friends of friends. The family dog probably got an invite before I did. They had rented additional properties to accommodate the crowd, and somehow there still wasn't enough space for me. I felt like I was looking at proof of my own invisibility. The lie wasn't even subtle anymore. I texted Blake, trying to stay calm. "Retreat looks amazing. Huge group this year." He replied immediately, casual and upbeat. "Yeah, gonna be epic. Mom and Dad went all out." I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. Instead, I typed out one more question. 118 people? Must be packed. How do you know the exact number? His response broke the last thread I was holding on to. "Dad's been stressing about fitting everyone. Had to rent 2 houses nearby for overflow." I put my phone down and stared at the ceiling. My eyes burned. It wasn't about space. It had never been about space. They had chosen to exclude me. On purpose. With effort. They made plans to fit everyone else but still found a reason to leave me out. The exclusion was strategic, calculated, and worst of all, accepted by everyone else. My family had a new tradition, leaving me out, and I had allowed it to become normal. I sat there in silence for a long time, my heart pounding like it was trying to escape my chest. The San Francisco skyline glowed outside my window, a cruel contrast to the darkness closing in around me. The betrayal wasn't new, but it had never felt this sharp before. I had seen the guest list with my own eyes. 118 people. I couldn't deny it anymore. The weight of years came crashing down. The skipped ceremonies, the missing gifts, the cropped photos, the subtle ways they made sure I never fully belonged. My body reacted before my mind caught up, shaking hands, tight chest, the tears already falling. I slid to the floor, pulling my knees to my chest like a child trying to disappear. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't making this up. This was the truth I'd been avoiding. For years, I had justified their choices. I made excuses. I internalized the blame. Maybe I was too distant. Maybe I wasn't family enough. But no more. Seeing that itinerary broke something open in me. There was no more room for delusion. Eventually, I stood up and did the only thing I could think to do. I called Grace. She picked up on the second ring, her voice full of concern. "They did it again." "Didn't they?" she asked, already knowing. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. 118 people, Grace. They even rented extra houses. She didn't try to comfort me with lies. Instead, she spoke the truth I couldn't say aloud yet. "This isn't about space," she said. "It's about control and punishment. They're punishing you for being yourself." Her words hung heavy in the air, but they rang true. I wasn't excluded by accident. I was excluded by design. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying a lifetime of quiet slights. The time my National Art Award ceremony was skipped for Brian's baseball game. The Christmas where everyone received curated gifts, and I got a $20 gift card. The way my mother always introduced me as still doing her art thing while raving about my siblings' degrees. All the signs had been there. I had ignored them, buried them under the drive to succeed. I kept hoping that if I worked hard enough, accomplished enough, maybe they'd finally see me. But no amount of awards or achievements could erase the black sheep label they'd stamped on me. I wasn't the daughter they had envisioned, so they simply chose not to see me at all. I scrolled through old family photos in the dark, noticing for the first time how many of them I wasn't in. Or worse, how many I was pushed to the edge of, barely part of the frame. I realized I had spent years shrinking myself to fit into a mold I was never meant to occupy, hoping that if I was small enough, quiet enough, I could squeeze into their version of love. But love built on conditions isn't love. It's performance, and I was done performing. The lie had finally unraveled. The wound had been exposed, and underneath the pain, something fierce and clear had begun to burn. This time, I wouldn't swallow it down. I wouldn't let it slide. I wasn't going to fight for a seat at their table anymore. I was going to build my own. When the sun rose the next morning, the grief was still there, but something else had taken root too. A flicker of clarity. I walked around my apartment, passing framed design awards, thank you notes from clients, and a shelf lined with coffee table books I'd contributed to. My life had meaning, my work had value. The only people who couldn't see it were the ones who should have known me best. That realization hurt more than I expected, but it also gave me power. I wasn't waiting anymore, not for an apology, not for validation, not for space that they clearly didn't want me in. I had the tools to create something on my own, something real. I thought about my grandparents, about the quiet way Grandpa Robert would sit beside me as I painted, never rushing me, how Grandma Eleanor would put my drawings on the fridge even when no one else cared. They had seen something in me, a light, a way of seeing the world that didn't fit into corporate boxes or social hierarchies. They never once asked me to be someone else, but the rest of my family had tried to mold me into something more presentable, more respectable. Over time, I started believing that maybe I was too much, too strange, too free. But I wasn't broken. I was simply different. And that difference deserved celebration, not shame. And that's when the idea landed. Not revenge, not confrontation. Something better. What if I honored my grandparents' vision in my own way? What if I created a retreat, not for networking, not for appearances, but for healing, for creativity, for belonging? The idea took hold quickly, like a fire sparked by dry brush. I called Diane, my old design professor who had mentored me through every major turning point in my career. Her voice was warm, grounding. "You're a creator, Amber," she reminded me. "When people tear down, you build. When they exclude, you include." Her words clicked something into place. I hung up and immediately started researching luxury rentals near Lake Tahoe. It felt poetic, taking back the setting that had always belonged to my family, but reclaiming it on my terms. That's when I found it. Emerald Bay Estate, a sleek, modern property just 15 minutes from my parents' retreat site. Private beach, floor-to-ceiling windows. It was stunning. The listing noted it was available the exact week of the family retreat. I took it as a sign. The price made my stomach clench, but I didn't hesitate long. I'd been saving for a condo down payment. This felt more important. I wired the deposit that same afternoon and sat back, hands trembling, heart pounding. Next, I called Rachel, one of my longtime clients and now a close friend. She ran a successful event planning business and had always admired my designs. "You're doing this?" she asked, eyes wide with excitement when I told her the plan. "A retreat for creatives? Amber, that's genius." We spent the next 3 hours planning everything. Rachel connected me to vendors she trusted. I started sketching out the branding and identity. The more we mapped it out, the more it felt real. This wasn't just a retreat. It was a resurrection of everything my grandparents had wanted the family gatherings to be, and I was finally the one bringing it to life. Planning the Creative Minds retreat became my obsession. Every night after work, I designed invitations, researched caterers, and curated workshop schedules. Grace agreed to lead a journaling session. Troy, a nature photographer I'd met through a client, would guide early morning lake photo walks. Miranda, a brilliant ceramicist, offered to teach pottery under the pines. I wanted every element to feel intentional, not just beautiful, but personal. This wasn't about impressing people. It was about gathering those who made space for creativity, emotion, and authenticity. People who saw others, not just tolerated them. The more I built, the more empowered I felt. The guest list came next. I invited friends who had supported me unconditionally, former classmates whose careers had blossomed in bold directions, and even a few clients who'd become like family. Grace was first on the list, of course, then Rachel, then Miranda and Troy. Each yes that came back felt like a balm on old wounds. One night, I stared at the list and hesitated. Should I invite anyone from my family? Part of me wanted to keep them entirely out. But then I thought of Heather, how she once defended me when Dad belittled my career, and Jake, who'd quietly bought one of my prints for his office. I added their names. No expectations, just possibility. With the core group forming, I designed a private website for the retreat and began curating a social media presence. Everything looked and felt me. For the first time in years, I wasn't asking for a seat. I was building the whole damn table. If you've ever felt overlooked or dismissed by the people who should have had your back, you know how much courage it takes to break the cycle. If this story resonates with you, take a second to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps more stories like this reach others who need them. And if you feel moved to support this journey, you can now click the Super Thanks button just below the video. It's a great way to help keep this channel going strong. Now let me show you how this retreat changed everything. Securing Emerald Bay Estate had been the first bold step. Now it was time to bring the space to life. Rachel and I worked tirelessly, curating every detail, down to the scent of the welcome baskets. We sourced local candles, California wines, handmade soaps, and I personally designed custom journals with the retreat logo stamped in gold foil. Each basket also included a handwritten note from me. We brought in a local florist to mirror the wildflower arrangements my grandmother used to make, and I insisted the main table be set with mismatched plates, a nod to the way family dinners used to feel. Imperfect, lived in, warm. This was a retreat, yes, but it was also a tribute, a reclamation, a declaration. Sophia, a private chef Grace had discovered through a mutual connection, was hired just in time to save us after a catering company flaked. Her food was not just delicious, it was artistic, nourishing, elevated. When she previewed the sample menu, roasted fig flatbreads, lemon herb salmon, seasonal tarts, I teared up. It was exactly what I didn't know I needed. I created a daily itinerary designed to ignite creativity and reflection. Morning yoga, journaling by the lake, art workshops, hikes, communal dinners, and late-night story circles by the fire. Every single moment was intentionally placed. Nothing was there to impress, only to connect. It was how my grandparents would have wanted it. By the time I printed the final schedule and saw it neatly organized on my desk, I could barely believe it was mine. This wasn't just some petty counter event. It had become something deeper, a legacy of belonging, a space created not in spite of pain, but because of it, a sanctuary of my own making. Sending the invitations gave me anxiety I hadn't expected. I poured so much of myself into them, designing an elegant digital package that reflected the tone of the retreat, peaceful, creative, soulful. Each invite included a personal note, reminding each guest why I wanted them there. Not for show, but because they had mattered in my life. Responses began trickling in within hours. Grace replied first, wouldn't miss it for the world. Then Troy, Miranda, Rachel, all yeses. My inbox became a space of warmth and validation, the kind I never got from my own family. I read every response out loud to myself like a kind of self-soothing. When Heather responded with a heartfelt, "This sounds more like what the Tahoe gatherings used to be," I cried. Jake politely declined, citing family obligations, but thanked me for the thought. His message felt honest, warm, like a small step towards something real. That meant more than he'd probably ever know. I never expected every sibling to come. I just needed to prove to myself that I could create a space where I didn't have to fight for worth. Every acceptance felt like a stitch in a wound I hadn't realized was still bleeding. And every name I left off was intentional. I wasn't creating space for guilt or appeasement. When I finally clicked send on the last invitation, I sat back in my chair, heart pounding. The retreat was happening. The people were coming. And for the first time in years, I felt something shift deep inside me, not just pride, but peace. I hadn't been included. So I created something no one could take from me. The week before the retreat was a blur of packing, prepping, and last-minute logistics. I drove up to Tahoe with my car packed tight. Baskets, signage, supplies, workshop kits, table decor, my personal art materials. Pulling into the circular driveway of Emerald Bay Estate felt surreal. The lake shimmered like a secret I was finally ready to tell. The property manager handed me the keys and gave me a tour. As I stepped inside, the open layout and towering windows revealed a panoramic lake view that almost took my breath away. "This is yours for the week," he said with a smile. The magnitude of what I'd created hit me in waves. I stood there for a long time. Alone in the great room, I felt my grandparents with me, their voices, their warmth, their belief in me. I unpacked the welcome baskets and set them on each bed, customizing details for every guest. For Heather, I included a childhood photo of us painting side by side, just in case she needed the reminder too. I posted a sunset photo from the deck to Instagram. Let the creative mind's retreat begin. Doc emerging from the shadows. I knew at least some of my siblings followed me. Let them see it. Let them feel it. I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't making myself small to fit their comfort zones. I was standing fully in my light. Guests would arrive the next morning. The final checklist was done. The food deliveries confirmed. The house was immaculate. The sun dipped behind the pines, and I poured myself a glass of wine. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about who didn't make space for me. I was finally focused on who did. Guests began arriving just before noon, one by one, greeted with hugs and visible awe. Grace's vintage Volvo was the first to pull in, followed closely by Troy and Miranda. Their eyes widened as they took in the soaring ceilings, the curated details, the lake shimmering just beyond the windows. "Amber," Grace said softly, "you created something sacred." I couldn't speak. I just nodded, overwhelmed. The energy in the house was electric but peaceful, like anticipation wrapped in acceptance. Every person entered carrying stories, hopes, and a mutual understanding that this space was different. Not exclusive, but intentional. Not formal, but sacred. I could feel the difference in every interaction, every shared glance of gratitude. Sophia had already begun prepping dinner in the open kitchen, the smell of rosemary and garlic wafting through the air. Guests explored their rooms, discovered their welcome baskets, and gasped over the little touches. Even the journals sparked joy. Many opened them immediately, sketching or writing thoughts as music played softly through the speakers. Heather arrived mid-afternoon. I met her at the door, and she pulled me into a long hug. "I had no idea what this would be like," she whispered, "but I can already tell. This is special." Her words were simple, but they healed something quiet inside me. She saw it. She saw me, and she chose to be part of it. By sunset, all 22 participants had arrived. The house buzzed with gentle conversation, excited introductions, and the hum of connection. We shared our first meal on the deck under glowing string lights, the lake catching the last of the golden light. I stood to welcome them, not as a daughter left out, but as a woman who built her own circle. The next morning, I awoke early, sunlight dancing on the hardwood floors. Before the schedule began, I checked my phone and saw dozens of notifications, Instagram tags, DMs, comments, posts from guests already sharing about the retreat, the lake views, the food, the creative energy. Then something else, a text from Blake. "That place looks incredible. What's this retreat thing about?" The message was unexpected. Blake had never shown interest in my work before. I stared at it for a while before replying. "It's a creative retreat I organized." A beat later, another message. "Wow, didn't know you were doing something like that. Looks amazing." Shortly after, Amanda messaged too. Her tone was different. "Mom's asking why Heather is with you and not at the family gathering. Just FYI. There it was. The ripple. The moment they realized I wasn't playing along with the quiet erasure anymore. I wasn't hiding, I was building, and they had no idea how to respond. But I didn't spiral. I didn't even feel shaken. I simply closed my phone, lit a candle, and joined the group on the deck for our sunrise yoga session. David led the class, his voice grounding, the lake our backdrop. As I moved through the poses, I let go of years of proving, justifying, and shrinking. I was here, whole. After breakfast, the house split into activity groups. Some followed Troy on a photography hike. Others stayed for Miranda's clay workshop. Laughter drifted up from the patio, blending with birdsong. Watching it unfold, I realized something profound. I had done what my parents never did for me. I created a space where everyone belonged. On the third day, something I never expected happened. We returned from a lake boat tour to find a figure standing on the dock. Elegant, silver-haired, familiar. It took me a moment to recognize her, my great-aunt Eleanor, namesake of my grandmother and the true black sheep of her generation. My heart skipped. "Aunt Eleanor?" I called, stepping closer. She turned and smiled. "Recognized the view from one of those Instagram things," she said dryly. "Was supposed to be at your parents' retreat, but this looked more interesting." She was 84, sharp as ever, and still marching to her own rhythm. My guests helped her up the steps like royalty. That night, she joined us for dinner. She told stories of her travels, her rebellious youth, and my grandparents' early days. Everyone listened, enchanted. After the others had gone to bed, we sat on the deck with a bottle of her favorite scotch. "They'd be proud of you, you know," she said. "Not just for this, but for staying true to yourself." Her words hit harder than I expected. "They saw you," she continued, "even when your parents didn't. Robert and Eleanor saw your gift, and they ached every time it was dismissed." Tears stung my eyes. For so long, I'd felt like I was rewriting my family's story from scratch. But maybe, just maybe, I was picking up where my grandparents left off. That conversation anchored me. It reminded me why I'd built this, not to provoke, but to heal, not to prove, but to create, not to escape family, but to remember the version of family that saw me clearly. I fell asleep that night with the lake breeze cooling my skin, and my heart strangely full. The next morning my phone rang. Caller ID, Mom. I ignored it, then again, and again. On the third call, I stepped outside to answer, bracing myself. Her voice was clipped. "Amber, where are you?" I could almost hear her jaw tightening with each syllable. "Eleanor didn't show up yesterday." "She's here," I said calmly. "With me?" Silence. Then, "What do you mean with you?" Her tone shifted from irritation to something colder. "I'm hosting my own retreat this week," I replied, and she chose to attend. Another long pause. "You're in Tahoe?" she asked, incredulous. "But we told you there wasn't enough space." My hands didn't tremble this time. "I know, I saw the guest list, the extra properties, the 118 people. I made my own space." She tried to backpedal, something about me being busy with work, but I didn't engage. "Your father and I are coming over," she said suddenly, and hung up before I could say no. I stood still for a long moment, watching the lake ripple in the morning light. I wasn't afraid, just tired. Tired of pretending, tired of minimizing, tired of shrinking myself. When I returned inside, Grace saw my face and asked quietly, "Is it them?" I nodded. "They're coming." She placed a hand on my shoulder. "Then we hold the line." An hour later, their black Mercedes pulled into the drive. I met them outside, not wanting to interrupt the clay workshop inside. My mother scanned the house, her eyes calculating. My father looked equally confused and defensive. "What exactly is going on here, Amber?" she demanded. I met her gaze head on. I created a space where I belong. My parents were visibly unsettled. My mother kept glancing past me at the house, at the joy spilling from its windows. My father opened his mouth, but I cut him off. "You said there wasn't room." "But there was. You just didn't want me there. So I stopped waiting for a seat and built my own table." "We thought you'd be busy," she offered weakly. I didn't flinch. "You never asked. You assumed. You've made assumptions about my life for years." I listed them without venom, just truth. "You've skipped my shows, ignored my milestones, reduced my work to hobbies. I'm not asking for recognition anymore. I've built my own." There was a flicker in my father's face. Something I'd never seen before. Reflection. His eyes moved from the house to the deck, where Sophia plated an elegant lunch. "Who are all these people?" he finally asked. "Friends," I said. "Clients, colleagues, people who see me, who value what I bring to the world." Heather stepped outside then and waved. Their surprise was palpable. "She came," my mother whispered. "She chose to be here," I replied. "You always said there wasn't space, but the truth is, you just didn't make space for me." For the first time in years, the balance shifted. I wasn't chasing their approval. I was standing in my truth. I offered them an option. "Dinner is at 7. You're welcome to join us, As guests, not as parents here to scold their child. My father looked stunned. My mother blinked rapidly. I turned to go back inside when I heard him say, almost reluctantly, "This is impressive." I didn't turn around, but I smiled. They came. I half expected them to back out, but at 6:55 they walked in. My guests were gathered on the deck, sipping wine as the sun dipped behind the pines. The long table was set with handmade pottery and fresh-cut flowers. Sophia's dishes gleamed under the string lights. It felt magical, sacred. Introductions were awkward at first. My parents shook hands with Grace, with Miranda, with Troy. They made polite comments about the property and the food, but as dinner unfolded, they began to listen, really listen, to the people praising my work, my vision, my leadership. I watched their faces shift, slowly, subtly. Eleanor sat beside them, unbothered and proud. "She's built something real," she said once, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Something that matters." My mother's face tightened, but she said nothing. My father kept watching me, not like the daughter who disappointed him, but like someone he didn't quite recognize. As the meal ended, I raised my glass. To everyone who made space for each other this week. To joy, to creation, to choosing love over exclusion. Glasses clinked, smiles bloomed. My parents didn't speak, but they stayed through dessert. When they left, my mother touched my arm gently. "Next year, we'll make sure there's space." I nodded but made no promises. I had built something too important to abandon. Their approval no longer defined me. This retreat had become a declaration of independence, of value, of healing, and I wasn't done yet. The next morning, as sunlight poured into the great room, I brewed coffee for the early risers and stepped onto the deck. The energy in the house felt light and alive. Laughter echoed from the kitchen. People were connecting, creating, building something together. This was the vision I had carried alone, and now it was real. Heather joined me with a mug in hand, her smile unguarded. "I needed this," she said, "more than I knew." She spoke of the pressure to be perfect, of always trying to earn approval. For the first time, I saw her not as my mother's favorite, but as a woman craving authenticity. We stood together in shared understanding. The day's schedule was full. Troy led a photography expedition, while Miranda set up for an advanced ceramics session. Grace facilitated a journaling workshop about reclaiming personal narratives. As I floated between groups, I realized how fulfilled I felt. Not just creatively, but emotionally. I had built a container for joy. Midday, I checked my phone and found a message from Amanda. "Mom's upset. Heather being there is making things worse. Why did you even do this?" I took a breath. The words didn't sting like they once would have. I didn't reply. I didn't need to explain myself to anyone who refused to understand my reasons. That afternoon, Sophia served lunch outside under the pines. As people chatted and shared sketches, Heather raised her glass and said, "To my sister Amber, for creating something beautiful and letting me be part of it." My heart swelled. She wasn't just attending the retreat, she was choosing it, choosing me. As the retreat entered its third day, I noticed a shift among the attendees. Walls were coming down, people were collaborating on spontaneous projects, impromptu songwriting on the deck, painting sessions by the dock. There was an energy of openness that reminded me of those early childhood summers with my grandparents. At breakfast, Blake's name popped up on my phone, coming up for a breather. "Can I stop by?" My heart skipped. Part of me was wary. Was he coming to judge or connect? But I said yes. An hour later, he pulled into the driveway looking sheepish. "I needed to see this," he said, stepping out of his car. I gave him a tour. He asked questions, real ones. "You built all this?" he asked, gesturing at the itinerary, the website, the coordinated decor. I nodded. Every piece. I introduced him to Grace and Troy, who welcomed him without judgment. He stayed for the workshop, then for dinner, then for the evening bonfire. That night, under a starlit sky, Blake sat beside me quietly. "I didn't realize how much you've done," he said. "I always thought you were just doing your little art thing. But this is real." I didn't need the validation, but hearing it, him saying it, unlocked something I hadn't expected, a kind of peace. Guests posted photos online, scenes of laughter, collaboration, creativity. My parents hadn't said much since dinner, but I knew the ripple was reaching them, not through confrontation, but through presence, through creation. The contrast between their retreat and mine was becoming impossible to ignore. On the fourth day, during a journaling session about reframing personal history, I found myself writing truths I had never spoken aloud. Lines about shame, about always being too much or not enough, about trying to mold myself into someone lovable to people who didn't know how to love what they didn't understand. I realized how much time I had spent trying to prove I was worthy of a seat at a table that was never built for me, and how exhausting that had been. What I was doing now, creating something from my values, my joy, wasn't about revenge. It was about release. Releasing the story that said I was less. Later that day, as I arranged supplies for the evening's creative showcase, Jake texted me. "Saw your posts? Proud of you, Amber. Honestly, sorry I didn't get it sooner." I stood there holding my phone, stunned. Jake had always been loyal to our parents' script. This was the first time he'd ever acknowledged me on my terms. I responded simply, "Thank you. I didn't ask for more. I didn't need to." For the first time, I felt like my story was being heard, not because I forced anyone to listen, but because I stopped whispering it in the dark and started living it in the light. That had changed everything. That night, the creative showcase overflowed with color and sound. Guests displayed photography, read poetry, shared sketches. I watched them applaud each other with genuine enthusiasm. At the center of it all, I finally saw myself clearly. Not the forgotten child, but the catalyst, the one who made room. By the fifth day of the retreat, the contrast between the two Tahoe gatherings had reached an undeniable crescendo. Social media buzzed with images from both retreats. But while one showed posed smiles and wine glasses raised at formal dinners, ours overflowed with candid joy, messy art, bare feet, and laughter. Amanda sent another message. "You're making a spectacle. Mom's humiliated." I read it twice, unsure whether to feel angry or satisfied. But I felt neither. Instead, I felt resolved. This was never about humiliation. It was about truth. I wasn't trying to provoke anyone. I had simply stopped hiding. Grace caught me staring at my phone and said, "You don't have to carry their discomfort." And she was right. For so long, I'd twisted myself to avoid making my family uncomfortable with who I was. Now, they were finally feeling the weight of their choices. And that discomfort? It wasn't mine to hold. Later that evening, Aunt Eleanor asked if I wanted help with the final day's logistics. She had slipped seamlessly into the retreat rhythm, sharing stories from her travels and even helping Miranda fire ceramic pieces in a makeshift outdoor kiln. "You've done something beautiful," she told me. "Don't let them take that." Her words echoed as I walked the property at sunset. The air was filled with the sound of clinking glasses and guitar chords. From the dock, I looked back at the house lit up in gold. It no longer felt like a rebuttal to rejection. It felt like a beginning. The following morning, as we prepared for closing activities, the sound of tires crunching gravel turned everyone's head. My parents' silver Mercedes had returned, this time with Amanda in the back seat. They stepped out cautiously, scanning the property with unreadable expressions. My pulse quickened. I met them on the path before they reached the house. "We thought we'd help you pack up," my mother offered, her voice too bright. Amanda stood behind her, arms crossed. I didn't invite confrontation, but I didn't shy away either. "We've got everything handled," I replied calmly, holding their gaze. Amanda stepped forward. "Can we talk privately?" I nodded and led them to a garden corner where pine shadows danced across the gravel. "This has gone too far," she began. "You've made them feel terrible." I shook my head. "No, they made choices. I just stopped pretending those choices didn't hurt." My father, unusually quiet, finally spoke. "You're right." The words stopped me cold. "We favored your siblings. We dismissed your work. We excluded you." My heart raced, uncertain whether to let hope in. "We didn't understand," my mother added, eyes glistening. "We judged without trying to see." Their admission didn't erase the pain, but it was a crack in the wall. Not everything needed to be forgiven in one conversation. I didn't offer absolution, but I did offer presence. "You can join the closing circle," I said, not as parents coming to reclaim control, as guests choosing connection. The final circle gathered in the great room as afternoon light streamed through towering windows. Guests sat on floor cushions, eyes bright with reflection. Each person shared what the retreat had sparked in them: renewed creativity, unexpected friendships, a sense of being seen. It was sacred. It was real. When my turn came, I spoke honestly. This retreat began as a response to exclusion, but it became something much more. It became a place of possibility. I looked around at the faces who had shown up, who had chosen me, who had chosen each other. Thank you for making space. My father shifted beside my mother, cleared his throat. I've spent my life giving speeches about markets, he said. But this, he gestured at the circle, this is something I don't have the words for. It was as close to awe as I had ever seen on his face. My mother nodded silently beside him. After the ceremony, guests mingled and exchanged contacts, promising to reunite. I stood beside Aunt Eleanor on the deck. Your grandparents would be so proud, she whispered. Not because you fought to belong, but because you created a place that no one has to fight to be part of. As the sun dipped behind the peaks, I realized something profound. I had once begged for inclusion, mistaking it for love. But true love, true belonging, is never begged for. It's offered freely. And when it isn't, you build your own table. Then you invite others to sit. The retreat had ended, but its impact lingered like a warm ember in my chest. As I returned to my San Francisco apartment, the silence felt different now. Less like loneliness, more like peace. I unpacked slowly, each item a reminder of what I had built from the ashes of exclusion. Photos, leftover journals, a few extra welcome basket items. They weren't just retreat materials. They were pieces of a healing ritual. As I placed them around my studio, it hit me. I had filled a void that had once consumed me, not with bitterness, but with intention, with meaning. The next morning, I received an email from Grace. Attached was a link to a private Facebook group she'd created, Creative Minds Alumni. It was already buzzing with photos, reflections, and connections. A community was taking shape, and I hadn't even planned for that part. One message stood out. This retreat reminded me that my creativity matters, Miranda wrote. I hadn't touched clay in 2 years. Another read, thank you for showing me that artistry is leadership. These weren't just compliments. They were reflections of the very truth I had struggled to claim. Sitting at my desk, I felt my grandparents with me. Grandpa's words echoed, your art will take you places. And it had, not just physically, but inward, towards self-worth, clarity, and vision. This wasn't just a week at the lake. It was a return to myself. A few days later, Jake texted asking if I'd like to join his family at his son's school art show. The invitation stunned me. We hadn't had that kind of contact in years. He'd be thrilled to show you his painting, Jake wrote. I stared at the message, unsure whether to cry or smile. I went. His son, Max, lit up when he saw me. Uncle Jake said you're the best artist in the family, he beamed. I knelt down beside him, studying the wild splashes of color on his canvas. I think you might be the next best artist in the family, I said, and he grinned. After the show, Jake and I walked to a nearby cafe. It wasn't a deep talk, but it was real. He apologized in his way for not reaching out sooner. I guess we just fell into the way things were, he said. Didn't mean we didn't see you. I appreciated his effort, even if it wasn't perfect. Later that night, I thought about how change often starts quietly, not with grand gestures, but with a child handing you a crayon drawing and calling you awesome. With a brother showing up, not with explanations, but with presence. And maybe that's enough to begin. The landscape of our family had shifted, slightly, subtly, but shifted nonetheless. And I realized I didn't need all of them to come around. I just needed the door to be open a crack. The rest, I could walk through on my own. Professionally, the retreat had sent ripples through the design world. Rachel posted a behind-the-scenes reel on her agency's Instagram, tagging my studio. Within days, inquiries poured in from brands, collaborators, even publications. What started as an act of emotional survival had become a creative landmark. A week later, a major design magazine reached out requesting an interview. We want to feature your studio, the editor said. But more than that, we want to highlight the retreat as a model of creative community building. I blinked at the email, rereading it twice to believe it was real. I accepted. During the interview, I spoke not about exclusion, but about intention, about creating spaces where artists feel safe, celebrated, and free. I didn't build it to prove a point, I said. I built it because I needed a place that saw me. Turns out, others needed that too. The article dropped a month later. Titled Designing Belonging, it featured photos from the retreat, quotes from participants, and a full-page spread of me standing on the deck of Emerald Bay Estate. Wind in my hair, eyes steady. My inbox flooded again. Not with praise, but with connection. I had always believed design could change the way people feel. But now, I'd seen it firsthand. I'd lived it. This retreat wasn't a detour from my professional path. It had deepened it, aligned it, clarified that my work wasn't just about beauty, it was about belonging. Not long after the article was published, I received a call from my father. I almost didn't answer, but something nudged me to pick up. "I read your piece," he said. No greeting. Just that. "Didn't realize you'd built something so respected." There was no sarcasm in his voice, just quiet recognition. I didn't know what to say. I had spent years craving this moment, and now that it had arrived, it felt anticlimactic, but also healing. "Thanks for reading it," I finally said. It meant a lot to write. There was a long pause before he replied. It meant a lot to read. He invited me to dinner, just him and my mom. I accepted cautiously. At the restaurant, my mother greeted me with a hug that lingered just a second longer than usual. It wasn't a full apology, but it wasn't nothing either. We sat down, and for the first time in years, they asked questions, real questions, about my clients, my process, the kind of design work that lit me up. My father nodded more than he spoke, but my mother kept looking at me like she was seeing me for the first time in a long time. It was strange and kind of beautiful. As we said goodbye, my mom touched my shoulder and said, "I don't think we ever really knew how to talk to you." I didn't say it out loud, but I thought, maybe because you never listened. Still, I smiled and said, "It's not too late to start." Heather and I began texting weekly. At first it was about small things, recipe swaps, design tips, book recommendations, but slowly, it deepened. "I've always envied your freedom," she wrote one day. "Your confidence to do what you love, even when no one clapped for it." That message made me cry. I'd spent so long feeling inferior to my siblings, it never occurred to me they might feel trapped, that maybe their applause came at the cost of authenticity, that maybe they hadn't rejected me, maybe they were just surviving. Too. Even Blake reached out again. "I keep thinking about your retreat," he said during a call. "It made me realize how mechanical I've become. I miss doing things just because I love them." I invited him to lunch. We didn't talk about the past, just the future. Jake continued to show subtle signs of change, forwarding me an article about creative business models, asking for input on his daughter's art class project. Amanda, Brian, and Lily remained distant, and honestly, that was okay. Healing doesn't have to mean full reunification. Sometimes it means building stronger bridges with the few who cross toward you willingly. I learned to value those small crossings more than the echoing silence from the rest, because they were rooted in sincerity, and sincerity was enough. In therapy, Dr. Michaels guided me through an exercise, rewriting old narratives with new language. Instead of "my parents excluded me," she suggested, "they didn't know how to hold space for who I became." It wasn't forgiveness, it was freedom. I carried that reframe into my daily life, into conversations with clients, into the way I led my team, into how I showed up online, not as someone trying to prove herself, but as someone rooted in purpose. There was a lightness to that shift I didn't know I needed. I no longer saw the family retreat as a door slammed in my face. I saw it as the moment that pushed me toward the door I was always meant to walk through, toward creating, leading, building. I wasn't on the outside anymore. I had simply outgrown the room. The irony, of course, was that by stepping away from the thing I most wanted to be part of, I had created something others now longed to join. Not out of spite, but because I had built it with clarity, intention, and heart. That was the real difference. When you stop chasing inclusion and start cultivating alignment, the whole world shifts. Your value doesn't change, but your perspective does. And with that perspective comes peace. The weeks after the retreat were oddly quiet, like the stillness after a storm, but not the kind that left destruction. This calm was constructive, reflective. I kept returning to my grandparents in thought. They'd planted seeds long ago, of creativity, of belonging, of love. And somehow, despite everything, I had managed to water them. I pulled out the letter they'd left with the property deed. the one expressing their wish for continued connection. I read it again with fresh eyes. "Let this place always be a source of joy and togetherness," Grandma Eleanor had written in her careful script. It wasn't about power or perfection. It was about presence. I realized that what I had created wasn't a rebellion. It was a continuation, a reclamation of that original spirit. My retreat had more in common with their legacy than any corporate gathering my parents had orchestrated. It wasn't loud or flashy. It was thoughtful, intimate, rooted. I printed out some of the photos from the retreat and created a memory wall in my apartment. Images of smiling faces, hands dipped in clay, people dancing on the dock under the stars. Each image was proof, not of vengeance, but of vision. I had carried their dream forward, and for the first time, I didn't feel like the black sheep. I felt like a torchbearer, a woman standing in the light of those who saw her clearly from the very beginning. I wasn't just included now. I was the one doing the including. Heather continued reaching out. One night, she texted me a photo of a painting she'd started. "Inspired by the retreat," she wrote. It was clumsy but beautiful, raw, real. "I forgot how good this feels," she added. "Just creating for the joy of it." That small message lit something in me. Maybe the retreat's impact wouldn't be measured in big announcements or public apologies. Maybe it would echo quietly through the lives it touched, one brushstroke at a time, one conversation at a time, like ripples. A week later, Blake sent me an email. Subject line, "Next year's retreat?" He offered to help. I don't know where I'd fit in, but I'd love to contribute. That one line said more than any formal apology. It said he saw me now. Not just the sister with the weird job, but the woman with vision. Even my mother had started following the retreat's social media page. She hadn't liked anything yet, but she was watching. I could feel the edges of her resistance softening. Not disappearing, but shifting. That too was enough, for now, because I no longer needed approval to move forward. I had my own compass now. It pointed toward meaning, connection, legacy, and I was finally following it without detours. As planning for the next Creative Minds retreat began, I felt less like I was organizing an event and more like I was shaping a movement. I thought about who to invite, not just in terms of names, but in terms of energy. Who brings light? Who shows up with heart? I reached out to some of the same people from last year, and each one responded with instant enthusiasm. But I also added a few new names. Young designers I had mentored, artists who'd reached out after seeing the photos online, even one former client who had gone through a tough divorce and was looking to rediscover herself. It was never about status or industry clout. It was about soul, alignment, shared values. This time, I added an extra note in each invitation. Come as you are. Leave with something you didn't know you needed. It became the retreat's quiet mission statement. Even my Aunt Eleanor offered to co-lead a session on storytelling and legacy. "About time someone passed on what your grandparents started," she said. Ever the renegade with a heart of gold. Her inclusion felt like a thread tying past and future together. I knew there would be whispers in the family about who was invited and who wasn't. But I also knew this. I was no longer trying to prove anything. I was simply building a table with enough seats for the people who actually showed up. One afternoon, while reviewing logistics for the retreat, I received a message that made me pause. It was from Jake. "I've been thinking a lot since Heather told me about what you created. I'm proud of you, Amber." That was all it said, but it was enough to make my chest tighten. Jake and I had never been particularly close. As the oldest, he had always been Dad's shadow, following in his footsteps without deviation. But maybe, just maybe, watching someone step outside the blueprint and still build something solid had stirred something in him. He went on to say he might not attend the retreat. His kids were still young, and he was navigating some big transitions at work, but he hoped we could grab coffee soon. "I'd like to hear more about your world," he added. That phrase stuck with me, because that's all I'd ever wanted from my family. Not applause or even agreement, just curiosity. A willingness to listen, to see me not as the outsider, but as someone worth knowing, even if the path I'd chosen looked unfamiliar. I replied the next day with a simple, "I'd love that," and I meant it. There was no bitterness left in me, only the quiet hope that this bridge, unlike the ones before, might actually hold. For years, my inner monologue had been laced with rejection. Not good enough, not welcome, not what they wanted, But that narrative had been rewritten, not by them, but by me, word by word, act by act. Through every invitation I sent, every detail I designed, I told a new story. It was no longer a story of the excluded daughter. It was the story of a woman who built something whole out of what was missing. I found peace in that shift. Empowerment, even. It was like I'd taken the broken pieces of my past and turned them into stained glass. Therapy helped. Dr. Michaels encouraged me to journal every week. Track your triggers, she'd said. But more than that, she challenged me to track my wins. The quiet ones. The ones no one else saw. Like waking up and not immediately checking for signs of disapproval. Or hosting a dinner and realizing I didn't need to impress anyone to feel valuable. My value wasn't situational anymore. It wasn't transactional. It was foundational. It existed because I did. Because I created. Because I cared. Because I showed up. Some days, I still struggled. Old wounds don't disappear overnight, but I no longer let those wounds narrate the story. I had found my voice again, and this time, I wasn't afraid to use it. I used to think there was never enough space for someone like me. Too different. Too independent. Too much. But now, I understand that space isn't something you're given. It's something you claim. Something you create. And it can grow as big as your vision allows. The next Creative Minds retreat was already shaping up to be even more powerful than the first. Not because it was bigger or flashier, but because I had grown. My clarity had deepened. My confidence had settled in like roots. I added a new feature. A story porch on the deck where participants could record short reflections about what it meant to belong. I knew some of those clips would one day become part of a documentary I dreamed of producing about creative resilience and chosen families. My Aunt Eleanor called it sacred rebellion, a beautiful defiance that builds rather than destroys. That phrase stayed with me, because that's what I had done. Not just rebelled, but created sanctuaries where others could heal too. And maybe that's what legacy truly is. Not something you inherit, but something you construct, lovingly and intentionally, so it outlasts the pain that tried to shape you. The final morning of the retreat had arrived, bringing with it a serene calm I hadn't felt in years. Guests moved slowly through the house, sipping coffee, laughing quietly, already exchanging contacts and promises to reunite. I stood on the deck overlooking the lake, letting the stillness soak into my bones. For the first time, I felt seen, truly seen, for who I was, not who I failed to be. That peace was interrupted by the crunch of tires on gravel. A familiar SUV rolled into the driveway, and I instinctively tensed. It was my parents, and with them, my sister, Amanda. I met them outside, my posture composed but my heart racing. They stepped out cautiously, almost like visitors entering sacred ground. My mother gave a strained smile, and my father looked around, clearly unsettled. "We thought we'd help you pack," she said, her tone artificially light. I didn't respond right away, watching Amanda instead, who avoided my eyes. "That's not necessary," I finally said. "Everything is under control." My voice was firm, calm, not aggressive, but immovable. Amanda stepped forward, her expression uncertain. "Can we talk privately?" I hesitated, weighing the possible outcomes, then nodded. I led them to a quiet corner of the property garden where the sunlight filtered through pine needles. The atmosphere was still charged, but no longer with anger. This time, it was about resolution. "This has gotten out of hand," Amanda said first, the tension in her voice betraying her polished words. "You've made Mom and Dad feel terrible." I met her eyes, unwavering. "That wasn't the goal," I said simply. "I just stopped accepting exclusion as my normal." They wanted to justify, explain, soften the truth, but I wasn't there to be softened. My mother opened her mouth to speak, but I gently interrupted. "Mom, please, let's not pretend this was ever about space." Her face crumpled slightly, but she didn't argue. My father, usually stoic, looked directly at me. "You're right," he said quietly, and the weight of those two words hit harder than any apology. "You're right," he repeated. "We excluded you. We favored your siblings. We wanted a version of you that never existed." The air felt heavy as the admission landed. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. "We were wrong to do that," he finished. My mother dabbed at her eyes, nodding silently beside him. "It wasn't everything I'd ever wanted, but it was more than I'd ever expected." "Thank you for saying that," I replied, trying not to let my voice shake. But that doesn't undo years of dismissal. This retreat? It wasn't revenge, it was survival. I needed something of my own. There was a pause, the kind that usually ends a conversation. But my father surprised me. "We'd like to try," he said, haltingly. "Try to understand your world, not change it." Amanda, still uneasy, attempted to redirect. "So will you come to next year's family retreat?" I considered it, then shook my head. "I don't know. Maybe. But this, what I built here, it matters. It's not just an alternative. It's a truth I needed to live." My mother looked pained, but nodded. "Maybe next year we can coordinate dates so you don't have to choose." It was small, but genuine. A door creaked open. As we returned to the house, Grace met me with a knowing look. "We're ready for the closing circle," she whispered. I turned to my family. "You're welcome to join," I offered. "Not as guests of honor, as participants." My father hesitated, but nodded. Amanda followed, clearly unsure but curious. We gathered in the great room, the same space that had hosted laughter, workshops, and storytelling. Everyone sat in a circle on cushions, and one by one we shared our reflections. When it came to my turn, I took a deep breath. "This retreat wasn't planned out of anger," I said. "It was planned from a place of longing, for connection, for space, for truth." To my surprise, my father chose to speak next. "I'm not one for words unless it's a quarterly report," he began, prompting soft laughter. "But I see what you've done here, and I didn't before. That's on me." The circle was quiet, holding space for what was, undoubtedly, the first time he'd ever admitted fault so publicly. As guests hugged goodbye and packed up their things, the emotional tone remained light but meaningful. Something had shifted, not just in the dynamics of my family, but in me. I wasn't waiting to be invited anymore. I had become the one creating invitations, on my own terms. Grace pulled me aside before leaving. "This is only the beginning. You know that, right?" I nodded. "I do, but it's enough. For now." I watched the cars pull away one by one, my heart strangely full. And as the house emptied, it no longer felt like a void. It felt like space reclaimed. After that dinner invitation from my parents, I hesitated before responding. I knew I wanted healing, but not if it meant shrinking myself again. A week later, I arrived at their house. It felt strange walking in, like I was entering familiar terrain with new shoes. I wasn't here to prove myself. I was here to be heard. Dinner was quiet at first, the kind of quiet that holds tension just below the surface. My father asked about my studio, and this time, he listened, not with politeness, but with interest. He even pulled up my retreat website on his tablet, scrolling slowly. "This is impressive," he murmured. My mother added softly, "I didn't realize how many people you've touched." Then it happened. My father leaned back in his chair and said the words I'd stopped hoping to hear. "We were wrong to leave you out." His voice cracked slightly, but he didn't shy away from the moment. "You've built something extraordinary, and we didn't see it because it wasn't what we expected from you." I looked at them both, stunned. My mother reached across the table, her eyes watery. "I don't know if I can undo what's been done, but I want to try to understand your world. I want to try to know you, not just judge you." Those were the words I'd longed for. Not perfection, just a willingness, a first step. And somehow, that was enough, for now. As I left that night, I stood for a moment on their front porch. I thought of all the nights I cried for this very thing, for inclusion, for acknowledgement, for them to just see me. It hadn't come wrapped in perfection, but it had come. And in the weeks that followed, the energy around me began to shift. Heather and I started weekly coffee dates, sometimes just talking about nothing. One morning, she brought an old sketchbook I had drawn in when we were kids. "I kept this," she said. "Even back then, you were telling stories no one else saw." We laughed and cried. Jake reached out too. He invited me to his son's school art show, where one of the pieces was clearly inspired by my Instagram gallery. "I think your nephew wants to be like you," Jake said. The words hit me like sunlight through clouds. Slowly, I was becoming part of their worlds again, but on my terms, not theirs. Blake surprised me with a phone call late one night. "I've been thinking about that retreat," he said. It looked like something I didn't know I needed. There was honesty in his voice that I hadn't heard since we were kids. We talked about our parents, about expectations, and about what it means to live authentically. It was healing. Even Amanda, usually cold and distant, started sending me short messages. Nothing grand, just checking in. I didn't rush to bridge the gap, but I responded. Small steps, no pressure. I had learned to stop forcing connections that didn't want to be made. But I'd also learned that when people reach, even slightly, it's worth noticing. It wasn't perfect. Lily and Brian stayed distant, hesitant, but I'd stopped measuring my worth by their closeness. I was surrounded now by people who had chosen me, and some of those people happened to share my blood. That was a gift, not a requirement. I had built a life that could welcome them in without depending on them. The following summer, I returned to Lake Tahoe, but this time, it wasn't for the family retreat. It was for mine. The Creative Minds Retreat was now in its second year, twice as large and even more impactful than the first. We held it at my grandparents' original property, per great-aunt Eleanor's blessing. That in itself was poetic. Walking into the main lodge for the first time in years, I felt something deep inside settle. I wasn't here as an outsider. I was here as a steward of their legacy. Every detail I designed honored them, from the fresh flowers in mason jars to the stargazing schedule inspired by Grandpa's stories. The space had come alive again. Participants arrived wide-eyed and inspired. Some were returning guests. Others were new creatives hungry for connection. The energy was electric. There was laughter, tears, art in every corner. We built clay, shared stories, swam in the lake, and sat around the fire as the sun disappeared behind the pines. It was everything I had once been denied. On the third day, Heather showed up unannounced with her daughter. "I wanted her to see what you've created," she said. They stayed the night, sleeping on an air mattress in the great room, just to be part of it. That evening, her daughter handed me a drawing she'd made of the lake. "I want to make art like you," she said. As I tucked her into her sleeping bag, I realized something powerful. I was now someone's safe space, someone's invitation, someone's seat at the table. The cycle was shifting, and I was the one shifting it. No longer waiting for space, no longer asking to belong. I had become the space, and there was room for everyone. Have you ever been left out? Not by accident, but by design. Have you ever stood outside the gates of a family that was supposed to open its doors to you? I spent years trying to earn space in a world that kept shutting me out. But the moment I stopped begging and started building, everything changed. Not overnight, not easily, but undeniably. Maybe you've been told you were too much, too different, or simply not what they expected. Maybe, like me, you've tried to squeeze your brilliance into a shape that would make others comfortable. If that's you, I want you to know, you are not alone. And more importantly, you are not wrong for being exactly who you are. You don't need permission to exist fully. The table they won't let you sit at, you can build your own. The love they withhold because you didn't follow the script, you can find or create love that honors your truth. The retreat I built didn't just heal me. It reminded me that I was never broken in the first place. I was just misplaced in the wrong story, until I wrote my own. So I want to hear from you. Have you ever been the outsider in your own family? Have you ever turned rejection into something beautiful? Share your story in the comments below. Let's create a space where every voice is welcome. Because your voice matters, your story matters, and someone out there needs to hear it. If this journey moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And if you'd like to support more stories like this, you can click Super Thanks down below. It's the little heart icon with the $sign. Every bit helps this community grow and stay strong. And remember, when the world says there isn't enough space for you, make your own, and make it magnificent.